Well, anyhow, everybody met at the bar right here on this corner when they were going to auction off the lots. And auctioneer Doherty from Dubuque was here, and he was in a wagon, and the crowd followed him around. And Matthew, tonight's lot was one of those sold that day. I can't remember what it sold for. His great-granddaughter is here now. Do you know what it sold for?
$2.50 or something like that. $2.50, something. It wasn't much.
I see. Well, they did sell the one lot here, which is the corner of Iowa Avenue and Clinton Street, where Phillips Hall is today. That lot, which was nothing but a stake in the ground, sold for $750. Where Old Brigby is sold for $300. The closer it was to the Capitol, the higher the lot sold for. But this is the Universalist Church that was built there in 1870. It's really quite a distinguished-looking church. I believe they say it's a Byzantine style of architecture. The Universalist Church is the same as the Unitarian. The Unitarian now is out on the corner of Iowa Avenue and Gilbert. But anyhow, this lot sold for $750. They sold about $30,000 worth of lots that first day. And then they had another sale the next day and for 2 or 3 more. And then that was August 18th, and then in October they had another auction sale. This is Iowa City as it looked in 1853, and you wonder why they used oxen in those early years. I never could understand why. Because they're slow, they're stubborn, they're awkward, but the one thing that the oxen had going for them, they could be driven day after day after day without rest, whereas horses have to be rested once in a while. I was telling one group the other night that Ed Ray told me that his grandfather was the only man who could break prairie with oxen without the use of profanity. They were pretty hard and difficult to handle, but they could work them for a long time, and that's why they used oxen at the outset. And when they laid Iowa City out, the Capitol was to be at one end of Iowa Avenue, and the governor's mansion was to be at the other end, 11 blocks to the east, actually right in front of this house that is still there. That was built in the 1890s. I call it the Kenyon House because a man named Kenyon built it. Very fine house, had a coach house in back, 3-story coach house. And I remember, I grew up a block from there, and I remember we used to skate in the winter on Ralston Creek behind here. But there was one place that never froze. And we said, well, we have to steer clear of that. And that was because of the spring up in the Kenyon yard. And it ran all winter, and the creek never froze there. Well, Harry Bremer bought the house, and he thought, well, this spring sounds great. I'll tap that spring and bring it to the surface and have a drinking fountain so that everyone who comes my way could have a nice, fresh, cool drink of spring water. So he hired a plumber, and he worked for a day and a half to get down to the source of the water. And do you know what it was? An old broken water main had been running for 30 years. But the idea was Iowa Avenue would be like Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, with the Capitol at one end, the White House at the other. Here it would be the Capitol at one end of Iowa Avenue, the governor's mansion at the other. But of course, the Capitol was moved to Des Moines in 1857, so they never did build the governor's mansion. The railroad was a big factor in the development of Iowa City. Now, those figures up there, January 1st, 1860, are wrong. The railroad got to Iowa City New Year's Eve, 1855. It was the first railroad to cross the Mississippi and penetrate the interior, all the way from New Orleans to St. Paul. This was the first railroad. And so it was a big factor in the development of Iowa City and this area of the county, or of not only the county, but this section of Iowa. And of course, it being the capital, that was another reason why it was particularly important. The population of Iowa City doubled in I believe it was 2.5 years. And it's amazing, of course, a lot of businesses got started because they could get merchandise from the east. Before, they had to haul it, or came up to Muscatine on steamboats, and then had to be hauled overland to Iowa City, so that slowed down much expansion that way. But with the railroad, merchandise could get in easily. The pioneers could get here without trouble. So it was a great boom for Iowa City. And the railroad was not extended beyond here for 5 years. So all those 5 years, Iowa City grew and developed at a rapid pace. This is the railroad that went across the Iowa River in 1860. That bridge was built. It's the same place as the bridge that's there now today. But of course, then they didn't have to have such a sturdy bridge. That was a double header going across. And of course, they hauled a lot of freight, and it went right west. And of course, they got as far as Marengo in 1960. That summer, they got to Homestead, and they started running stock trains to Chicago every Saturday night. And they had big loads of stock going in. That was the first time that area was able to get their merchandise to the stockyards without the usual problem of hauling it to Rock Island or to West Virginia and putting it on a steamboat. This is the bridge as it is today. This is a small engine. This picture was taken at Elmira, Iowa, and that's the water tank that was over there. Most of you don't probably know where Elmira is, but it was 8 miles northeast of Iowa City. The plug line from Iowa City ran there. It connected up with 2 other railroads, and this station, it was a good-sized station, had countless trains in there and many freights on these 3 lines, but no town ever sprang up there for some reason, and not even a stockyards. There was a little hotel and restaurant, and that was the only thing. And when they pulled the railroad out, why, of course, there was no town there. But they took lots of water in those days to run those trains, and a lot of them, all of them at first were run with wood. And they had to have piles of wood every 8-10 miles on the railroad, so they never would be caught without sufficient wood. And this is a local train going across the Rock Island Bridge in 1911. That's when this present bridge was put in. They tell the story about, they used to close the saloons at 10 o'clock at night, and there were some of the fellows that would stay till they closed, and then they'd help in their buggies or wagons, and the horse knew the way up to go home. Well, there was one man who, that was his custom, and they helped him in his wagon, and he started down. Usually he went across the Ryerson Bridge, but somehow, this particular night, the horse turned when he got to this bridge, and he went across the team, across this bridge, and they got almost all the way across, and then they fell to the ground and were killed. And I read this story, and I didn't put in anything about who it was, and then the phone rang the next day, and called up, and it was Kelly from the bank, Tom Kelly. And he said, you know who that man was that who went across that bridge with his team? And I said, no. And I said, Tom, I don't want to know. I don't want to hurt anybody. Well, he said, I'm going to tell you anyhow. It was my drinking uncle. But his drinking uncle had got out of the carriage before they started across the bridge, and he woke up the next morning in the hotel. This is the Rocky Mountain Limited, 1905, a marvelous train. It was wonderful to ride that to Colorado Springs or Denver. You get on at 4:30 in the afternoon, go back in the club car and relax, go to the diner at 6 o'clock, have a wonderful dinner. It's not like eating on an airline where you're all cramped up. They had linens and silverware and always flowers on the table and finger bowls. It was really elegant living. And then you'd go to bed at 11 o'clock, and the next morning you'd wake up and go to the diner, and there'd be Pikes Peak in the distance. It was really delightful traveling. Of course, we can't do that anymore.